Hi, this is Tom Needham, and you're listening to The Sounds of Film, and I'm so excited to have on the phone with us right now a true legend. I'm talking about Peter, Paul, and Mary's Peter Yarrow. He's well known around the world for his songs Puff the Magic Dragon, Blowing in the Wind, Where Have All the Flowers Gone, If I Had a Hammer, and many more songs. He's also an activist and a writer. And Peter, thank you so much for joining us today on The Sounds of Film.
Oh, it's terrific to be with you, Tom. And thank you. People should know, yes, I did write Puff, and we did, Peter, Paul, and Mary, discover, as it were, some extraordinary writers and sing their songs like, Bob Dylan and his songs, Blowing in the Wind, and Times They Are Changing, and When the Ship Comes In, and goodness knows other ones, and also we were fortunate enough to find a very gifted, also relatively unknown writer by the name of John Denver, whose song "Leaving on a Jet Plane" became his introduction to the broad American public, and Gordon Lightfoot, similarly with "In the Early Morning Rain." And so when you speak of those, that it really reminds me of the fact that we together were able to make an introduction to the American public of certain songs that brought certain remarkable writers to the public's attention. And also, we were the bridge between traditional folk music and people's getting to know a contemporary form of folk music to us, and then later on delve into some of the traditional music that, of course, is so amazing and so rich with what we need today, authenticity.
Right. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned all those songwriters, because I did want to speak to you about that. I rewatched a terrific PBS documentary about Peter, Paul, and Mary that you were part of, directed by Jim Brown. And in that documentary, it's mentioned that at that time, I want to talk to you a little bit about the Village and the whole folk music scene. It was considered to be an honor for artists to cover one another's songs. And,
right.
and Peter, Paul, and Mary became very well known for that. Can you explain a little bit about that tradition from the Village and covering other people's songs?
Right. And the term covering, interestingly enough, didn't even exist at the time. Neither did the word band. So Peter, Paul, and Mary never considered ourselves to be a, quote, band. And if we sang other people's songs, we sang songs written by songwriters that we discovered. First of all, in the Greenwich Village in that early era, it was non-competitive. Excuse me for clearing my throat. I was up late recording.
That's okay.
And I promise you, when I arrive at the Suffolk Theater, I will not be speaking and singing with this frog in my throat. But as we talk, it will dissipate. So in any event, in Greenwich Village at the time, it was a time of enormous idealism. Really, nobody that was there had any real aspirations in terms of the kinds of success that generally accompany people into the world of folk music. It is true, there had been some people who had reached a certain degree of success and great prominence, but there were a happens is that those people who control the machinery for record companies or any other show business companies, well, if they are basically interested in making more money, and that's the basis of the decision that they make.
Right.
What will be played is what sells most, and that will always be mediocre. Not always, but most of the time. And because there are formulas. This is what brings you money. That's your responsibility. And the fact is that money being introduced to show business in the area of making music it has made it very different. Yes, they made a lot of money, the record companies in the 60s, but they were not greedy in the way people are now. And they also were very proud of the fact that the artists that, like Peter, Paul, and Mary, were also considered the spirit of the inspiration for activism and positive change in their own time.
Yeah. Peter, can I ask you?
Not the case anymore. So
yeah.
who has written the Bob Dylan's Blowin' in the Wind in the last, 20 years? It's been written, but we never get to hear it, except a small group of people that might go to the Kerrville Folk Festival or any of the other folk festivals. And conversely, a Bob Dylan, who was that iconoclastic and new and remarkable and would not have really gotten a shot, on American Idol or The Voice or whatever. I mean, it just it doesn't compute. Not all areas of show business are constrained in this way. There are independent films.
Yeah.
There are experimental and very exciting things being done in the theater. And actually, it turns out that in musical theater, there are remarkable opportunities because there are producers who are willing to create something and let it come forward. Like, for instance, the Hamilton. I mean, that's more like Bob Dylan,
Yeah.
Or The Great Comet, which I saw a few nights ago, which
right.
was threatened with closing, but it's an entirely different, very eclectic musical form, and it's amazing. And of course, painters are not constrained in this way, because, they're going to paint what their muse tells them to paint to a large degree. And if they're going to be illustrators, that's a different thing. But if they're going to be painters or, performance artists, the very nature of that involves experimentation and iconoclasm.
Well, Peter, let me ask you. I know that you didn't get into music to make money, and I know very early on in your career you became involved in many different causes. You were an activist, but the fact is, as soon as you put out that first record, Peter, Paul, and Mary was a huge success. At one point, you had 3 albums that were hits at the same time within a year. And you were touring all over the place, selling out to audiences. How did that success, that I'm sure it did produce some money, affect...
we were extremely successful, my goodness.
So how did that impact you initially? How did that feel?
Well, interestingly enough, we were so dedicated and excited every night. I mean, the first year we did concerts, which was less than a year after we met, we did 6 concerts a night for 10 months straight. We were out, and Albert Grossman was our manager.
Right.
And he is, of course, really allows you to grow as artists and really be part of the American culture, you have to do it in person. He kept us off television for all intents and purposes almost entirely. He felt that really diluted, in many ways, maybe not for other artists, but certainly for folk artists, because a television and the world of television really didn't know what to make of us. They didn't know, here we would do an Andy Williams show. We say, okay, they've got hits, but they're not thematically where we're going.
Yeah.
That was totally different. So, for Peter, Paul, and Mary, our involvement in what we were doing was so comprehensive that we'd get on stage each night, and each night we'd get almost all of the concerts were at colleges. We'd go into not an auditorium generally. It was a place where they're playing basketball or did sports or whatever.
Right.
And we'd have a huge audience there, and the audience would absolutely have a group epiphany. They never experienced that, because what we were putting out there was in the tradition of what Mary and I had grown up with Noel Ball, not so. He had grown up in the Midwest, and he was into jazz, and he was into rock and roll, he was into classical music, but he didn't really know about folk music at all until he came to Greenwich Village. We, however, were, as Mary put it, seekers raiders. We saw the music really as a vehicle for creating community and advancing a socio-political agenda. We were steeped in that tradition. That isn't to say that we didn't love the music, but that was where our hearts were. Mary had been a part of a little folk group called the Song Swappers that Pete Seeger had formed, teenagers, and they made recordings, and you can get them at the Library of Congress, and you can hear Mary's voice. It's distinctive, as it was later when she was a teenager. So, if you're so busy doing something that you're committed to, for instance, if you were to talk to Alexander Calder, while he was making his sculpture, which he did constantly and continually throughout his life, from the time he started, he would be dimly aware. Yes, I'm very successful, and I'm making this piece, and it weighs 14 tons, and it's there for in this location, and I've invented something called a mobile, M-O-B-I-L-E, and people are, but you would go to, and say, there are two things that were on our minds. Number one, the excitement of something that all children have to learn if we're going to get out of this mess in society now. That the most important rewards of life come from doing something that feels really meaningful to you in terms of giving your heart to it, and hopefully also not only are you creating something that has value or has beauty, but also is making the world a better place in a broader sense. If you're doing that, you're really absorbed with it. You'll find that this is the case, for instance, with really, really focused, dedicated doctors.
Yeah.
May be doing really, really well, but their lives are taken up doing what they do. They're really not on a moment-to-moment basis thinking about, oh, I can buy this, or oh, I can do that. And that's sustained. And it's the case now that the reason, and here is the gift of it. Here I am, the age of 79. My voice a little had 16 voters, actually 15, one got canceled last moment, Democrats and Republicans, that were together for 2.5 days, skillfully guided by Bill Tardy, who was an extraordinary leader in the area of interactive, transactional kinds of exchanges. And at the end of it, and we made a documentary, by the way, Jim Brown, the same one who did the Peter, Paul, and Mary PBS show, 50 years with Peter, Paul, and Mary, he filmed it, and we're now in the process of editing it and completing it.
Oh, great.
But you see over the course of this take place is the absolute bursting of these stereotypes. People emerging saying, I don't agree with this person. I dramatically don't agree with this person. But this is a good person who wants good things for America. And we agree on so much. And I have no reason to fear or hate this person. And you see that because in the pre-interviews that we had, we documented their apprehensions about getting together, and their fear that they couldn't talk to the other side, that there was no way to talk to them on a rational basis. In the end, that was absolutely not the case. And right now, that is so important that we change. So what we're doing is we're taking this. Better Angels, by the way, comes from the Abraham Lincoln quote in his inaugural address when he said, "We are not enemies, but friends. We must summon our better angels." This was at the time of the need to heal from the Civil War.
That's great. Peter, can I ask you...
Well, wait, let me just tell you one other thing.
Yeah, sure.
We're going to take this to thousands of small gatherings of this sort, not 2.5 days, but 6 hours. And if we do it in Rotary clubs and in libraries, and that's, we're having launches these places, and we do thousands of them, it'll create a momentum. And what that means is Peter Yarrow, talking to you at the age of 79, is not looking back and saying, oh, how meaningful was it that I was there with Mary and Noel Paul-Stuckey in 1963 in August at the March in Washington. Oh, those were the days. These are the days where I feel very much needed to work in these areas, to be there at Standing Rock, to be there at fracking marches, to sing, to be there in Madison, Wisconsin, when Scott Walker was trying to dissolve the rights of government employees to have a union, and indeed succeeded. Yes, I'm on the one hand, I am resisting. I am fighting for the things that I believe in. On the other hand, I will not put down. I will not demean. I will not treat my fellow Americans who disagree with me with disrespect, and that's important. So I'm still doing what I was doing. I was, 22 years old when I met Noel Paul-Stuckey and Mary Travers. I'm doing the same thing. And for me, in terms of money, this is not.
Well, that's
and
great.
he doesn't.
That's great.
It enters into the picture. But if I have enough, and I have much more than enough, I've had much more than enough for a long time. But I don't pursue it as a thing. It is a natural outgrowth of something that I do that I feel is so rewarding and so meaningful. And kids need to learn this. You pursue money, you become greedy, you become narcissistic, you lose your life. I sing in a hospice. They're not wearing their jewels. They're not talking about their money. Okay, thank you for letting me finish that thought. I wanted to kind of get to the point of
I appreciate that, and you're still doing amazing work, just by just some of the things that you mentioned. I did want to go back though, if you can, just for a second, to tell me about how you and the others in Peter, Paul, and Mary did make probably what was maybe for the record companies a difficult decision, but it doesn't sound like it was a tough decision for you. That at the height of your popularity, you decided to become, and maybe you always were, real political activists. You mentioned the March on Washington. You were involved in protesting against the Vietnam War. And at one point in that documentary that we referred to earlier by Jim Brown, I think someone says that as a result of some of your actions, you ended up on enemies lists. So you're authentic. I mean, you stood for things and you were willing to pay the price. Was there really a price for some of the things that you did back then?
Well, the price that we paid was minuscule compared to what you look at when you go to the Rosa Parks Museum, you know, in Montgomery, Alabama.
Yeah.
You can look at that wall and you see, you know, the dozens and dozens and dozens of people whose lives were lost, you know, starting with Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner. It wasn't just Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner. You know, we were targeted, and we did lose some of our southern market, of course, a good deal of it when we went to the Selma Montgomery March, and Mary was seen there running up to Harry Belafonte and giving him a big old smackaroo. They didn't want to see a black person. I mean, you know, and we're hardly out of the woods in that regard in terms of, you know, we have a Black Lives Matter, you know, movement. Because there is extraordinary racism inherent to the criminal justice system, and puts this extraordinary disproportionate number of young black men in jail. And but we've come an enormous way, no doubt. But the work continues. But Mary and I, you know, the first album we had, If I Had a Hammer. I mean, that was, and Where Have All the Flowers Gone? You know, we were, as I said, we were seekers, raiders. We grew up, Mary's parents were very left-wing. My mother was also not in the same way. She was a member of Planned Parenthood and the Teachers Union, which at the time that she was a part of was considered a left-wing action. Unions were not, were viewed, there was danger to teachers who were in unions that they would lose their jobs. So, you know, we had it in our blood. And Noel Paul Stuckey, who came from the Midwest, had it in his heart. So when he saw that activism that Mary and I embraced, he got on board. But it was there from the get-go before we recorded our first album. It just so happened that the timing of our coming together and the advent of the emergence of the civil rights movement, as it had evolved at that point, because it had been going on a long time before the March on Washington in '63, you better believe. But when it crystallized at that point, and we were there at the March on Frankfurt, which was another march, by the way, where Martin Luther King participated. Sorry.
It's okay.
When we were there, that was only fate. That way, here we were, a group with these predispositions. The Weavers were there before with those same perspectives. during the sanctuary movement, when the United States was propping up the Duarte regime with really, these we went down there, and there were these people who couldn't go on the street because they lost 57,000 people in a country of 11 million, whereas we lost about the same number in a country of 170 million. Vietnam, they lost the same number, 57,000, who were disappeared or killed by the Treasury police, and which you can imagine the impact on that population. And yet, because we were propping up the Duarte regime, which was perpetrating this, we would not allow those people who had to leave the country or lose their lives sanctuary. It was called the sanctuary movement. And when we came back from there and Nicaragua, where we had mined the harbors, and that was when in the time of the hang on. Oh, let me think of his name. Just a second. This is a senior moment.
Well, that's okay.
Okay, well, in the time of at that same time when we were in Nicaragua, the United States was trying to get rid of the Sandinistas.
Right.
And we were paying these mercenaries. And we came back, and we were inflamed. We were in a little village where they'd lost. There was a little tiny cooperative in the country that had been attacked by the Contra that we were paying mercenaries. And we walked into the village, and it was just 2 days after they had been hit, and they'd lost half a dozen people, and they were just an agricultural cooperative, and this is what we were paying for. So when we got back to the United States, we went to one of our first concerts there. I think it was in Maryland or thereabouts. It may have been, I think it was in Baltimore. They were picketing us with signs saying, if I had a hammer, if I had a sickle, they're saying you're communists.
Wow.
And we're, therefore, it was the same. We got a little taste of it.
Yeah.
Of that kind of attack.
Well, you were also very outspoken in terms of the anti-nuke movement, and I don't know about you, but I've been following for a while now the whole story about Fukushima, and it really scares me. And I was wondering, is that still a cause that you're interested in at all?
Well, yes, it is. Very much so. It's part of the whole environmental movement, and the point is that it's not needed. The cost of, nor are fossil fuels needed anymore, because the cost of delivering green energy is now lower than delivering energy via nuclear or fossil fuels. But the danger of everybody, back in 1978, there was a big concert at the Hollywood Bowl, which was pictured in that documentary, and I organized that one. It was called Survival Sunday, and it was to keep the nuke that was on the San Andreas fault from going online. They built a nuclear power plant on an earthquake fault line. And, of course, the proponents of nuclear said, well, no, this is the wave of the future, and it's safe. And, of course, then we had 3 Mile Island, and then we had and very sick.
Yeah.
And that's the case with the earth, too. And the problem is that some of these changes, if they're allowed to occur, cannot be reversed.
Well, Peter, if I can just ask you one last question. You're very eloquent when you talk about all these different political and environmental issues, but you're known around the world for Peter, Paul, and Mary and your own solo work, too. And, when I look at the music industry today, it's different today. I mean, back when you were making music in the beginning, there was the whole folk music scene, and it wasn't uncommon for artists to mix into their music political messages and social messages. And then even later on in the music industry, like when hip-hop came around, it wasn't uncommon for hip-hop artists to put songs out there that had strong messages. And then all of a sudden, like, the record industry kind of nixed that. And now the music has really evolved into something that doesn't even resemble that any longer. I know there's still artists here and there that are trying to do that, but the mainstream music almost doesn't allow that kind of thing anymore. What can musicians do to do their part to create good art that also has meaning, which is like what you've really dedicated your life to and that you're still doing in your music?
Well, it will happen naturally. I'm up here in Middleburg, and as I said, I was up late recording, which is why I'm hoarse, but less so now than when we started to talk. I'm up here with my daughter Bethany Yarrow, who's a great climate activist. Shortly we'll be going to the Unity concert in the Black Hills of South Dakota, which is in its fourth year, in a gathering that is dedicated to restorative justice and the return of the Black Hills to the Lakota Sioux. And we're recording with the Peace Poets, whose lives are dedicated to organizing around and motivating people around doing the kinds of things that are going to positively allow us to emerge from in our lives in a way that we're thinking about us, not about me as a competitor for money, and really looking at our life's trajectory is a zero-sum game, because if we get more money, others will get less, and if we don't, we're going to get. If they get it, we won't get it. Look, if your values have been tainted, from my perspective, and that's what life is about for you, and or if you feel constrained as an artist because you say, if I'm writing songs about anything other about than romance and adolescent angst, for instance, or whatever, I'll be deprived of a career. You're going to be part of the problem, and you will also not have the rewards of what is most important in life. For me, what I found to be, we have to educate kids to know that is the case, and they can be artists, they can be painters, they can write theater, they can write plays for theater. The film is huge and has a huge impact, but what they can do is first have it in their souls. You don't go out there and say, first do it, live it, and once you're living it, you will see that there are vehicles for you to say with your art what you believe in, what you care about. It's not all your art. We sang, we sang the first time ever I saw your face, long before Roberta Flack recorded it. There it was. Leaving on a Jet Plane was not a political song. Puff the Magic Dragon is not a political song. This is not one-sided.
Right.
But there must be part of you as a human being that is dedicated, if you want the rewards of it. You must have that in your life as part of you, or you're that isn't to put you down. That's to say you lose.
Yeah.
Lose the great gifts of this. Now, when I come to do the concert in Suffolk, at the Suffolk Theater, I will be singing Peter, Paul, and Mary's repertoire, but it will register differently because it's not just a nostalgic moment to remember Blowing in the Wind. That song has great value and great meaning right now. And there are songs that I've written that relate to right now. A song called The Children Are Listening. The children are listening. If we say something cruel and harsh, they will do the same. The children are listening. If they grow up to be bullies, we'll have ourselves to blame. It's all around us. The possibilities are all around to be sung about, to be written about, to care about, to live in your art. It's not difficult. And I think it was Alicia Keys who had some very political songs on her last album.
Mm.
There was a women's march, and people, 30% of those people never, just considered, if I do that, that's a radical act. I'll never do anything like that. But there they were, and what happened when they did it? Say, oh my God, this is heaven. This is life. This is what life is about. Yep.
Well,
what's going on?
Yeah. Well, Peter, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the Sounds of Film. Your words are inspiring. We've been speaking with Peter Yarrow of Peter, Paul, and Mary, and I want to recommend that everyone listen to his music, new and old music. And Peter, do you have a website or something like that where people can go to find everything that you're up to?
I've been. My website is under reconstruction, so right now it's not the locus for it. But if you just Google
right,
Peter, Paul, and Mary, or Google Peter Yarrow, and go to YouTube, I'll tell you, you could be sitting in bed for months.
Well, I did that to get ready for this, so you're absolutely right. Peter, thank you so much. We're going to be playing a lot of your music today on the Sounds of Film, and I really enjoyed speaking with you, and hopefully we can do this again in the future.
Oh, great pleasure, my friend, and I'm looking forward to seeing you, and I've enjoyed talking to you. I don't regard this as anything but a privilege. You and I've been talking, people have been listening. Wow, what a gift. We're both fortunate, right?
Absolutely. Thank you again, Peter. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Yeah.